What if the place you built with your own two hands became the center of your entire world? What if every sleepless night, every dollar you saved, every choice you made, all of it lived inside four walls with your name on the lease? That's my cafe. That's my dream. And honestly, it's the story of how I fought for it, again and again. When I was 21, I thought being a barista was just a side job, something to cover bills while I figured life out. But the longer I stayed behind that espresso machine, the more I realized I loved it. The smell of fresh beans hitting the grinder, the hiss of steam foaming milk, the quiet nod from a customer who came back for the third day in a row. I saw it. Coffee wasn't just coffee. It was connection. It was trust poured in a cup. I started saving, not in some big dramatic way, but quietly. A few dollars pulled from every paycheck. Cash folded into an envelope tucked under a stack of old books. Sometimes I skipped meals out, sometimes I worked doubles. People thought I was crazy, sacrificing for something that didn't even exist yet. But I could see it in my head. Warm lights, brick walls, shelves of plants, a place where strangers turned into regulars. You know how people talk about dreams? Most of the time they're blurry. Mine was sharp. I could smell the cinnamon rolls baking in the oven I didn't own. I could hear the scrape of chairs on the floor I hadn't laid. And I could see myself, not in a uniform with someone else's logo on my chest, but wearing whatever I wanted, greeting customers who came because of me. For almost a decade I worked, barista, waitress, temporary receptionist. I did them all. I picked up morning shifts that started at 4 a.m. and night shifts that ended at 2 a.m. Sometimes I did both. There were months when I barely saw daylight. My friends posted pictures from trips to Vegas or Miami, and I sat in the back of a bus counting crumpled bills, making sure I had enough for rent and my savings envelope. The cafe wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself I wasn't ordinary. Everyone around me expected I'd get married young, settle into something small, maybe raise kids and stay in the same neighborhood. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted more. I wanted to own something. Something no one could say they handed me. The first time I saw the corner lot in Chicago that became my cafe, it was nothing special. A tired little storefront, dusty windows, a faded for lease sign leaning sideways. But to me, it looked like a blank canvas. I ran my hand across the dirty glass and whispered to myself, "This is it." Signing that lease was terrifying. I remember holding the pen and feeling my entire body shake. The numbers looked impossible. My savings envelope was thin compared to the deposit required. But I scraped together everything, sold furniture, borrowed from a friend, worked extra shifts, and then I signed. Just like that, the dream became real. Renovation was another war. My hands blistered from sanding wood. I painted walls until my wrists ached. There were nights I sat on the bare floor, surrounded by paint cans and empty takeout boxes, staring at the mess and wondering if I'd lost my mind. But every morning I'd wake up, open the door to that empty space, and feel this rush. It's mine. No boss. No landlord breathing down my neck about closing early or wearing the wrong shoes mine. Opening day came faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before. I baked until dawn, lined up mugs, polished every table twice. And when the first customer walked in, a young woman carrying a stack of books, I almost cried. She ordered a latte, sat by the window, and stayed for hours. She came back the next day, and the next. Soon I had regulars, a man who always ordered black coffee and read the newspaper, a couple who came in every Saturday morning, college kids cramming for exams. It was working. My cafe wasn't just alive, it was thriving. People told their friends. Reviews online started to pop up. Someone even called it a hidden gem. And every time I locked up at night, flipping the sign to closed, I felt this pulse of pride in my chest. I did this. But pride has a shadow, and that shadow is the thought, what if it's taken away? That fear lingered, but I pushed it aside. I focused on pouring coffee, laughing with customers, planning seasonal drinks. I built relationships. My cafe wasn't fancy, but it had soul. And for me, it was more than enough. If you've ever had something you built from nothing, you know what I mean. It's not just bricks and chairs, it's pieces of you. The missed birthdays because you worked late. The tears you wiped away when no one was watching. The hope you carried when everyone else doubted. That's what my cafe is. Looking back, maybe that's why I didn't see the storm coming. I thought once you built your dream, it stayed safe. I didn't realize that sometimes the people you expect to celebrate you are the ones who want to take it away. You think family should be your safe place, right? The people who cheer for you the loudest, who celebrate your wins like they're their own. That's what I believe too. But the truth is, sometimes the hardest battles don't come from strangers. They come from the people sitting across the table at Sunday dinner. At first, everything felt normal. My parents would stop by the cafe, smiling, asking about sales. They'd brag to their friends about how our daughter built a business from scratch. I loved hearing that. It made the sacrifices worth it. But slowly, I noticed little shifts. Questions that felt less like support and more like probing. How much do you clear each month? Do you really need all these employees? Why don't you let us help manage things? I brushed it off. I thought they were just curious, maybe proud. But then my younger sister Jenna started showing up more often. She wasn't really into coffee. She didn't even drink lattes. Yet suddenly, she was hanging around the counter, chatting with customers, asking about the books. She'd flip through my invoices without asking. At first, I laughed it off, but inside, something tightened. One night, after closing, Jenna stayed behind. She leaned against the counter and said, "You know, this cafe could be so much bigger if you let me step in. Mom and Dad think you're in over your head." I froze. My own sister, the girl who used to share secrets with me under the covers when we were kids, was looking at me like I was incompetent. I tried to explain. I told her I built this place with sweat and tears, that it wasn't about getting rich, it was about independence. But she smiled, this tight little smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Independence is overrated," she said. "Family matters more. We should own this together." The word own hit me like a slap. From that night on, I couldn't ignore the signs. Family dinners turned into interrogations. Dad would bring up business strategy like he was auditioning for CEO. Mom would question my staffing decisions, hinting that Jenna had fresh ideas. Conversations I once looked forward to became traps, and then came the night that burned itself into my memory. It was a regular family dinner, pasta, salad, breadsticks, the usual. But halfway through, Dad cleared his throat. He looked at me, then at Jenna, and he said, "We've been talking. It's time to put the cafe under family management. It's not fair for you to carry this alone." I remember my fork clattering against the plate. My chest felt hollow. "Family management?" I asked. Mom jumped in. "We'll all benefit. You'll still be involved, of course. But Jenna can handle finances. Your father can oversee operations. We'll take care of you. Take care of me." As if I were a child who couldn't tie her own shoes. I tried to argue, but they had rehearsed every line. Jenna leaned in and whispered, "You don't want to make this ugly, do you?" That was the moment I realized this wasn't about support. It was about control. I left that dinner shaking. I walked the city streets for hours, neon lights blurring through my tears. How do you fight your own blood? How do you draw a line when crossing it means losing the people who raised you? The cafe had always been my safe place, my pride, my proof that I could stand on my own. But now it felt threatened, not by competition down the street, not by rising rent, but by the very people I thought would protect me. That's the cruel part, when love and betrayal share the same face. There are moments you can't erase. Words that stick like stains on your memory, no matter how many times you replay them, hoping they'll sound different the next time. For me, that moment was a family dinner. The night started like any other. The smell of garlic bread filled my parents' kitchen. Plates clattered as Mom laid out silverware, her voice humming along to some old Motown song playing softly in the background. Jenna poured wine like she always did, smiling that practiced smile that looked friendly but felt sharp. I remember thinking, maybe tonight will be easy. Maybe I'll get one normal dinner without talk of the cafe. But halfway through, I knew I was wrong. Dad cleared his throat. He always did that before making a speech. I felt my stomach knot. He looked at me across the table, his eyes steady, and then at Jenna, who gave the tiniest nod. And then he said it. "We've been thinking. It's time to put the cafe under family management. Family management." The fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. The room went silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. I asked, "What does that mean?" My voice was sharper than I intended. Mom leaned in, her tone soft, like she was delivering good news. "Honey, you've carried this burden alone long enough. Let us help. Your dad can oversee operations, Jenna can handle finances. We'll all benefit. It'll be safer this way. Safer. The word burned. Safe for who?" I tried to explain, tried to remind them what I'd given up to build this dream. The double shifts, the years of saving, the nights I fell asleep on the cafe floor. But their faces were set, rehearsed, as if they'd had this conversation without me a dozen times already. Jenna smirked, leaning forward, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You don't want to make this ugly, do you?" Something inside me snapped. I looked at her, at the sister I used to braid hair with, whisper secrets to under the covers, and realized she wasn't standing beside me anymore. She was across from me, aligned with them, aligned against me. I told them no. Clear, firm, maybe louder than I meant. This cafe is mine. I built it. It's not up for negotiation. The room froze. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's eyes shimmered, but not with sympathy. Disappointment. Jenna just sat back, satisfied, like she had expected this outcome. I left that dinner with my heart pounding, the night air cold on my face as I walked out the door. I didn't even take leftovers, which in my family was unthinkable. Every step away from that house felt heavier, but also necessary. Walking down the street, city lights blurring through unshed tears, I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How do you fight people you love without losing them? How do you protect your dream when the threat isn't outside? It's sitting at your own table, using words like family to disguise control. That was the ultimatum. Hand over the cafe or stand alone. And standing alone felt terrifying. But letting them take it? That felt like erasing myself. And sometimes, when you're cornered, clarity finally arrives. There comes a point where silence feels heavier than words, where not speaking up feels like surrender. For me, that point arrived the morning after the dinner ultimatum. I woke up with the taste of anger still in my mouth, replaying every sentence, every smirk, every sideways glance. And I knew. I couldn't keep pretending this was just a misunderstanding. I walked into my cafe that morning with a new kind of determination. The bell above the door jingled the same way it always did, but I heard it differently. It wasn't just a sound welcoming customers, it was a reminder. This was mine. My sweat had stained these walls. My laughter had echoed in this space long before anyone else claimed a piece of it. And if I didn't protect it, no one would. The first step was setting boundaries, simple ones, but sharp. When Jenna strolled in like she owned the place, sliding behind the counter with that casual entitlement, I stopped her. "You're a customer here," I told her flatly. "Not staff, not management, just a customer." Her face flushed. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. Maybe, I said, but at least I'm clear. It was the first time I'd drawn that line out loud, and though my voice shook, something inside me steadied. But lines drawn need to be reinforced. So I sat down with a lawyer, an expense I hadn't planned for, but one I couldn't avoid. We drafted documents, ownership clarified, boundaries on paper, not just in my head. Because love doesn't hold up in court, and family loyalty doesn't pay the bills. I won't lie. It hurt. Signing those papers felt like admitting I didn't trust them, but the truth? They had already broken that trust. I was just putting it into writing. The weeks that followed were tense. Family dinners became rare. When they happened, conversation was brittle, every word balanced on a blade. Jenna would toss passive-aggressive comments, Dad would sigh like I was ungrateful, and Mom would shake her head, muttering about how I was pushing us away, and maybe I was. But I had to. The real breaking point came when they showed up unannounced. Again, I was in the middle of training a new hire when I saw them through the window. Mom, Dad, and Jenna, standing outside like a board of directors arriving for inspection. They walked in, glanced around, and started critiquing everything. The decor, the music, even the pastries. Finally, I snapped. "If you don't like it, leave," I told them. My voice rang through the cafe louder than I expected. Customers stared. My parents froze. Jenna's jaw tightened. It was messy, embarrassing, but necessary. Because sometimes drawing the line isn't quiet or graceful. Sometimes it's loud and raw and public. That night I sat alone in the cafe after closing, lights dimmed, silence pressing against me. My chest ached, not from regret, but from grief. Because setting boundaries means accepting loss. And I was losing something I never thought I would. The version of family I believed in. Still, as I wiped down the counters and stacked chairs, I felt something else too. Freedom. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They let in what's healthy and keep out what's toxic. They give you space to breathe. And for the first time in months, I could breathe again. Looking back, that was the moment everything shifted. Not when they made demands, not when I cried walking home after dinner, but when I finally stood tall and said, no. Because sometimes protecting your dream means risking everything else. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is draw the line. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like every word spoken was a weapon aimed at you, even if no one raised their voice? That's what family became after I drew the line. It wasn't shouting matches. It wasn't slammed doors. It was silence sharpened into knives, casual remarks dripping with poison, love turned conditional. At Sunday dinner, conversations skipped around me like I wasn't there. Mom would ask Jenna about her new projects. Dad would discuss finances with her as if I were invisible. If I tried to join in, the table grew quiet, then shifted topics. I laughed once at something on TV in the background, and Jenna smirked. Glad you still have time to laugh, considering the stress you're under. My stomach twisted. The war wasn't loud, it was calculated. But silence is suffocating. You start questioning yourself. Am I selfish? Am I paranoid? Was I wrong to protect my cafe? I'd replay their words at night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling. We just want to help. Family sticks together. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The more I heard those lines in my head, the more guilt mixed with anger until I couldn't tell them apart. And yet, every morning when I unlocked the cafe, I felt clarity. The sound of the key turning in the lock, the smell of coffee beans filling the air, it grounded me. Here, I wasn't the selfish daughter. I wasn't the difficult sister. I was simply me, the woman who built something from nothing. Customers had no idea I was fighting battles outside those walls. They smiled, chatted, asked for their usuals. One man told me, "This place is the highlight of my day." I held on to that like a lifeline. It reminded me why I couldn't give in. But the war followed me home. phone calls that ended in tears, texts left unanswered, invitations forgotten. Jenna even showed up once at the cafe, ordering a latte just to tell me loudly, "Mom says you're drifting away from us. Customers heard." I wanted to disappear. I started writing things down in a notebook. Every conversation, every jab, every time I felt cornered. It wasn't just to keep track. It was to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. Because gaslighting doesn't always look like lies. Sometimes it looks like people you love convincing you that your truth is selfish. The hardest part? I missed them. I missed laughing with my mom while cooking, rolling my eyes at Dad's corny jokes, binge-watching shows with Jenna. But every time I reached for those memories, I hit the wall of their betrayal, and that wall kept growing. The silent war taught me something I never expected. Sometimes love and harm live in the same house, and you can't heal if you keep pretending one cancels out the other, so I chose distance, fewer dinners, shorter visits. I poured my energy into the cafe, into people who valued me without conditions. Was it lonely? Yes. Did it hurt? Absolutely. But slowly, I realized something. The less I absorbed their poison, the more I could breathe. Because silence doesn't win unless you let it. There's always that one moment when everything you've been holding together starts to split. For me, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't glass shattering or voices raised. It was a Tuesday night. I was sitting in the cafe after closing, lights dimmed, wiping down tables just to keep my hands busy. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jenna. Short, sharp, and cruel. "You'll regret this." "Don't say we didn't warn you." My chest tightened. I stared at the words until the screen went dark, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt exhaustion. This wasn't love anymore. It was leverage. And I couldn't carry it any longer. I cried that night. Not the messy sobs of heartbreak, but the quiet kind where tears slip down your cheeks without sound. The kind that leaves salt on your skin and a hollow in your chest. That was the breaking point. I realized if I kept letting their silence, their digs, their manipulation define me, I'd lose myself completely. So I made a choice, not out of anger, out of survival. I called Mom the next morning. My voice shook, but my words were steady. "I love you, but I can't keep doing this if love means giving up who I am." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just, "You're making things harder than they need to be." I hung up and sat there in the quiet, phone heavy in my hand. But instead of shame, I felt a strange lightness, like setting down a bag of bricks I'd been carrying for years. The breaking point wasn't about cutting ties completely. It was about drawing a boundary so clear, even I couldn't blur it anymore. No more late-night arguments replayed in my head. No more wondering if I was the villain in my own story. And you know what surprised me? The world didn't collapse. The cafe opened that day. Customers laughed. The coffee machine hissed like always. Life went on. For the first time in months, I could breathe without waiting for the next blow. The breaking point isn't the end. It's the beginning of finally choosing yourself. It's funny how life delivers its biggest shocks when you've just started to breathe again. I thought I'd made peace after the breaking point. I was lighter, freer, almost convinced that the worst had already passed. But the universe had other plans. It started with a knock at the cafe door one morning. Too early for customers, too heavy to ignore. I opened it and there stood Jenna, her arms crossed, her expression sharp. She didn't waste time. "You think walking away fixes everything? You think you're better than us now?" Her words sliced through the calm I'd built. For a moment, I felt that old panic rising, the urge to shrink, to defend myself, to keep the peace at any cost. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of apologizing, I laughed. Not cruelly, not bitterly, just a soft, incredulous laugh, because I realized what this really was. It wasn't about me leaving, it was about them losing control. That was the twist. The story I'd been telling myself, that I was weak, dependent, too fragile to stand alone, wasn't true anymore. The fear that kept me bound wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to them. I told Jenna, calmly but firmly, I don't owe you my silence. I don't owe you my life. Not anymore. She blinked, stunned. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She left without slamming the door. I stood there in the quiet cafe, heart pounding. It hit me then. The fight was never about approval. It was about freedom. And once you claim it, there's no going back. This was the midpoint twist. The moment everything turned. Not because the conflict vanished, but because I finally saw the truth. There comes a point where silence feels heavier than words. I'd spent so much time tiptoeing, keeping the peace, carrying their anger as if it belonged to me. But in that moment, something cracked open inside me. It wasn't just Jenna's visit. It was the weeks of quiet after. The way my phone buzzed with half-hearted apologies, guilt-ridden texts, and then turned cold again. It was the whispers I caught when I walked into the grocery store. People love a scandal, don't they? They replay your worst moments as if it's entertainment. And maybe for them, it is. But for me, it was survival. One night, I stood in my living room, holding the letter I had written but never sent. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. I read it out loud to myself, as if the walls needed to hear what I had been afraid to say. I will not let your story define me. I will not carry your shame. And then I did something I never thought I would. I pressed record on my phone. No script, no edits, no filters. Just me, speaking into the lens like I'm speaking to you now. I told the truth. Not the polished version. Not the version they spun to protect themselves. My truth. Was I terrified? Absolutely. My voice cracked. My palms were sweaty. I wondered if anyone would believe me or if I'd just painted a bigger target on my back, but I hit upload anyway. And when the video went live, my chest felt both hollow and free, like I had just torn down the last wall. The fallout was immediate. Some people attacked, others defended. But for the first time, the noise didn't matter. I wasn't hiding anymore. The chains that held me, fear, silence, approval, snapped. And that's the thing about breaking chains. It doesn't erase the scars, but it does make you unstoppable. What does it really mean to move on? People throw that phrase around like it's easy, like it's just a matter of time. But for me, moving on wasn't about forgetting. It was about deciding whose voice I'd carry with me and whose I'd finally set down. After the video, my life didn't magically fix itself. Bills still needed paying. Old friends still kept their distance. My family's silence grew louder than any argument could have, but I realized something. I had a choice now. For the first time, the story wasn't being written over my head. I was holding the pen. There were mornings I woke up with a pit in my stomach, wondering if I'd gone too far, if exposing the truth had ruined any chance of reconciliation. But then I'd read one comment from a stranger, someone saying my words gave them courage to speak up in their own life. And suddenly, the fear didn't feel so heavy. I started doing small things differently, saying no when I meant no, leaving the phone unanswered when it buzzed with their guilt-laced calls, spending time with people who saw me, not the scandal. And every time I made one of those tiny choices, I felt myself getting lighter. One evening, I walked by the lake near my apartment. The air was crisp, the kind that stings your nose a little but clears your head. I stopped, looked at the reflection on the water, and it hit me. I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission anymore. Not theirs, not the world's. Mine was enough. And that's the quiet truth no one tells you. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it feels like a deep breath after holding it too long. Sometimes it's just choosing yourself again and again until it becomes second nature. So when people ask how I moved on, I don't tell them I forgot. I tell them I remembered who I was before the noise, and I chose to keep her. Because in the end, moving on isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it own you. Here's the part I didn't see coming. Once you tell your truth, it doesn't just belong to you anymore. It starts living in other people's hearts. It shows up in their late-night thoughts, in their own hidden battles. My story stopped being only mine the moment I spoke it out loud. I remember one afternoon, weeks after everything blew up, opening my inbox and finding hundreds of messages. Some were raw, some were messy, some were just a single line. Me too. At first, I didn't know what to do with all that pain pouring into my screen, but then it clicked. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the whole reason I had to go through this storm was to hold up a mirror so others could finally see themselves. The funny thing is, I didn't set out to be anyone's voice. I wasn't aiming to inspire, I was just trying to survive. But survival has a way of rippling outward. Like tossing a stone in a lake, you never know how far those circles will spread. And that's when I realized something bigger than me was happening. What looked like a personal mess was actually part of a much wider pattern. People silenced, people shamed, people walking around with invisible weights no one else bothered to notice. My small act of speaking cracked something open. And once a crack appears, the light doesn't stop leaking in. Of course, there were still critics. There always are. They said I was being dramatic, that I exaggerated, that I should have kept quiet. And you know what? Those words stung less than I expected. Because for every one person telling me to shut up, 10 more whispered, "Thank you." I started to see that moving forward wasn't only about me choosing myself, it was about giving others permission to do the same. My story became a kind of key, not a solution to every locked door, but a reminder that locks can be broken, that silence isn't permanent, that even the smallest voice can be louder than the biggest lie. One night, I sat with all this in mind and thought, what if this is the whole point of pain? Not to crush us, not to define us, but to connect us, to remind us that we aren't carrying our burdens alone. Because here's the truth. Every single person watching this has a story. Yours may not look like mine. It may be quieter or louder, or hidden under layers so thick you've forgotten what's underneath. But it's there. And maybe it's time you stop letting others tell it for you. When you dare to put words to it, you'll notice something shifts. People you didn't expect will nod. Strangers will see you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize you were never as alone as you thought. So what do we do now? We keep choosing to speak, choosing to listen, choosing to believe that our voices, no matter how shaky, matter, because they do. If you've been holding back, if you've been waiting for the perfect moment, let me tell you, the moment is now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready now. And if you think your story is too small, too messy, too complicated, remember this. Even my story, the one that almost broke me, became something bigger when I shared it. Yours can too. At the end of the day, here's what I've learned. Life isn't about erasing the hard chapters. It's about weaving them into something whole. It's about using your scars as signposts, not shackles. It's about saying, yes, this happened, but it's not the end of me. It's just part of the map. So as I close this chapter, I want to leave you with this. You are not defined by the silence that others forced on you. You are defined by the courage it takes to break it. And maybe, just maybe, the story you've been afraid to tell is the very one someone else is waiting to hear. Do you know that moment when silence feels heavier than words? That's where I was standing, on the edge of something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it pressing down on me. The world looked the same. The streets, the people, the neon lights flickering across store windows. But inside, everything had shifted. Like the floor had tilted a few degrees, and I was sliding toward a place I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I kept telling myself, "It's over. You survived." The story of A and B, those storms of betrayal, of hard choices, of shattered trust, they had finally closed, at least on the surface. People around me thought I was fine, maybe even stronger because of what I'd been through. But strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the act of holding yourself together long enough to smile in front of others, even when you're unraveling inside. There's this thing no one talks about after the storm, the silence that follows. You expect peace. You expect relief. But instead, you get this hollow echo, as if every question you pushed aside during the chaos suddenly rushes back to fill the room. And I was left asking myself, what do you do when the fight ends, but the scars still burn? That's where C begins. Not with fireworks, not with a new enemy to chase, but with a quiet tension, the kind that gnaws at you when the lights go out. I remember lying awake at night, hearing the hum of the city outside my window, and wondering if I had really escaped, or if the story had just changed masks. Because deep down, I felt it. Endings aren't always real. Sometimes they're just transitions disguised as closure. The people closest to me tried to offer comfort. "Move on," they said. "Don't look back." But what if moving on isn't about running forward? What if it's about standing still long enough to face the shadow that keeps following you? I tried to bury myself in routines, coffee at the same cafe, the same train ride to work, the same playlist on my phone. But every ordinary act seemed to whisper reminders of what I thought I had left behind. One night, walking home, I caught a glimpse of someone in the crowd. A familiar profile, a way of carrying themselves that struck me like lightning. It couldn't be, I thought. It can't. But the doubt was planted. That seed of suspicion, small but sharp, began to grow. Had the past truly released me, or was it circling back in disguise? This is the cruel trick of survival. It teaches you to always expect the next blow, even when there's none. And so every sound, every face, every shadow became a possibility, a question mark. I wasn't just living, I was scanning, anticipating, bracing. And the more I did, the more I realized closure had been an illusion. The storm had left, yes, but the air was still charged, heavy, waiting for thunder. I share this with you not to dramatize, but to be honest. Because maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had a moment where you thought the worst was over, only to realize the echoes hurt more than the original blow. That's the unspoken truth. Healing doesn't come neatly wrapped. It comes jagged, uneven, full of false starts. And in those cracks, something new begins to grow. Sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying. And so, as I stood in that in-between place, I had a choice. Pretend the silence was safety, or lean into it, listen closely, and discover what it was trying to tell me. Because silence isn't empty, it's full of clues. And in that silence, I began to realize that the real conflict of this chapter wasn't out there, waiting for me. It was already inside, shaping every breath I took. This is where our story continues. Not with an explosion, but with a whisper that refuses to be ignored. The thing about silence is, it doesn't stay silent forever. It waits. It presses. And eventually, it cracks. For me, the crack came on a Tuesday, a regular, ordinary Tuesday. You know the kind you barely remember because nothing big happens. The sky was gray, the sidewalks were wet from a drizzle that couldn't decide if it wanted to be rain. I was carrying a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm in my hand. Everything looked normal. But that's the trick, isn't it? Normal has a way of hiding the extraordinary until it blindsides you. I was sitting by the cafe window pretending to read when it happened. A laugh. Just one laugh, sharp and familiar, cutting through the low hum of background noise. My stomach clenched. My mind told me it was nothing, but my body knew better. I froze, every nerve awake, because that laugh didn't belong to the present. It belonged to my past. I turned, slow, careful, like if I moved too quickly I'd scare the moment away. And there, across the room, was a figure. Not exactly the same, not exactly different. Time had done its work. A few new lines on the face, a different style of hair, but the presence, unmistakable. My pulse hammered in my ears. It was like the world had folded in on itself, stitching the old chapters back into the new one. I wish I could tell you I marched over, demanded answers, got my closure right there. But no, I stayed frozen, hidden behind the rim of my cup, watching. That's what fear does. It steals your voice, even when your heart is screaming. I sat there, paralyzed, while they laughed, ordered, moved with the same careless ease I remembered. And when they finally left, slipping into the drizzle outside, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely set the cup down. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over like a broken reel. Was it really them? Or was it a trick? My brain stitching together a stranger's face with the memory I hadn't let go? I wanted to believe it was coincidence. But deep down, I already knew. Some ghosts don't stay buried. They wait, they circle, and eventually they return. The following days turned into a blur. Every crowd felt suspicious. Every corner carried the possibility of another glimpse. I caught myself scanning rooms, searching faces, jumping at sounds that seemed too familiar. And that's when the truth hit me. The real prison wasn't built by them. It was built by me. By my own fear, by the weight of everything I hadn't resolved. But here's the twist. Fear can be a teacher. It shows you where the wound still is. It forces you to admit what you've avoided, and slowly, painfully, I began to see that maybe this wasn't just a haunting. Maybe it was an invitation. So one evening, I did something different. Instead of drowning in playlists or scrolling endlessly to numb the tension, I sat still, lights off, phone down. Just me and the dark. I listened to my breath, to the way my chest tightened when I thought of that laugh, to the ache that pulsed like an old bruise. And I asked myself a question I had been running from. What do I actually want now? Not revenge, not escape, but truth. That was it. Raw, unpolished truth. Even if it hurt. Even if it didn't give me peace. Because living in shadows was worse than facing the flame. That night marked a shift. Small, fragile, but real. I knew I couldn't control who showed up in my story again, but I could control how I met them. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange kind of strength blooming. Not the strength of pretending, but the strength of standing unhidden. You see, that's the secret nobody tells you. Healing isn't about erasing the ghosts. It's about learning to meet them without letting them own you. And as terrifying as that cafe moment had been, it also cracked something open in me. The silence was broken, and in that break, there was room for something new to begin. So here I am, standing at the edge again. Not of collapse this time, but of choice. And maybe that's what C is really about. Not the return of the past, but the courage to finally face it, without disguises, without delay. Have you ever felt the air change before something important happens? Not in a dramatic way. No thunder, no flashing lights. Just a subtle shift, like the world is holding its breath. That's how it felt the morning I decided to stop running. I didn't have a grand plan. no speech rehearsed, no perfect setting. All I had was a restless heart and the knowledge that avoiding it was eating me alive. So I followed the thread of memory, back to the places where shadows clung the tightest. The cafe was the first stop. I sat by the same window where I'd frozen before, watching reflections in the glass. My chest tightened with every stranger's laugh, but instead of shrinking, I let myself stay. Every sound, every flicker of movement, I absorbed it. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped being my master. Days later, fate did what it always does when you finally stop hiding. It delivered. I turned a corner, and there they were, no stage lights, no audience. Just two people colliding in the ordinary mess of life. For a moment, time fractured. The air thickened and my throat dried. But instead of looking away, I met their eyes. And here's the shocking part. It wasn't rage that hit me. It wasn't even sorrow. It was recognition. Like staring at a mirror that showed not your face, but your scars. They froze too, caught in the same snare. A dozen unspoken things swirled between us. Betrayal, regret, maybe even guilt. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was a bridge, daring us to step across. I don't remember who spoke first. Maybe it doesn't matter. What mattered was that words finally spilled. Messy, raw, jagged, not eloquent, not rehearsed, but real. They talked about fear, about mistakes they couldn't undo. I talked about nights drowned in questions, about the walls I built to survive. The sentences tangled, voices cracked, and more than once I wanted to walk away, but I didn't. Neither did they. And in that messy exchange, something shifted. I realized the closure I wanted wasn't about hearing them say the perfect thing. It was about me speaking, me not silencing my truth anymore. The power wasn't in their apology, it was in my voice. When it was over, we didn't hug. We didn't make promises of redemption. We simply stood there, a little lighter than before. The past didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip, and that was enough. Walking home, I noticed details I hadn't seen in months. The way sunlight spilled between buildings, the warmth of strangers' chatter, the ordinary rhythm of footsteps on pavement. Life hadn't paused for me. It had kept moving, waiting patiently for me to catch up. Here's what I learned. Ghosts don't disappear when you confront them. They just lose their power to dictate your steps. And maybe that's all closure really is. Not erasing the pain, but reclaiming the space it once consumed. So if you're listening, if you've ever felt haunted by what was left unsaid, hear me. The past will always echo, but you don't have to live inside the echo chamber. You can step out. You can breathe again. And in that first breath, shaky as it is, you'll find the beginning of freedom. Not a perfect ending, but a real one. And sometimes that's the best kind we get.